Hello and welcome to Decision NYC with Ben Max. I'm Ben Max, your host and the executive editor of Gotham Gazette. The 2021 New York City election season is underway, and it's poised to be the most significant municipal election in decades. All of city government is on the ballot, and because so few incumbents are eligible to run for their current seats due to term limits, New Yorkers are electing many new office holders and the next roster of city leadership. There will be a new mayor of New York City elected here in 2021, as well as a new city controller, new borough presidents, many new city council members, and that's not all that's on the ballot. There are a number of incumbents who are eligible for and seeking re-election to certain seats, and there's a very crowded and competitive race for Manhattan District Attorney, among others. Party primaries are set for June, and the general election in the fall will culminate on November 2nd. This is the first full set of municipal elections that will feature both early voting and ranked choice voting, a new system that applies to only party primaries and special elections, and we'll have a separate show just on that. This city election cycle will be of enormous importance under usual circumstances, but it's unfolding at a time of enormous crisis for our city, raising the stakes of the decisions that you, the voter, will make. The new wave of city leadership will quite clearly make or break the city's recovery from the devastation of the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on health, families, jobs, education, housing, and more. So we're pleased to bring you this new series of interviews with the candidates running for mayor of New York City, as well as candidates for other offices. These one-on-one conversations will help you get to know the candidates better, learn about their backgrounds, their platforms, their vision for New York City. We hope this and other interviews will help you sort through your many choices and make an informed decision when it's time to vote. So joining me here today is Isaac Wright Jr., a Democratic candidate for mayor of New York City. Isaac, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. Glad to be here.
So thanks for taking the time. So give folks a broad overview of who you are, where you come from, what leads you to this point. We'll dig into what you want to do as mayor and why you're running. But first, some background on you.
Well, I'm the third son of six, born in a military family, lived in many places all over the world, came to New York decades ago and consider myself an avid New Yorker and Yankees fan. I've been through a lot from the time I came to New York until now. Some people may know that I was wrongfully convicted in 1991 and given a life sentence for a crime that I did not commit. On top of that life sentence, I was given another 70 years. And this was during a time when there wasn't social media, when there wasn't podcasts, and the world did not care what was happening to me. And the reason why they didn't care, because they didn't know. The government at that time was able to create a narrative and push that narrative. And that resulted in me having to make, one of the most difficult, if not the most difficult decisions of my life. I had to actually represent myself. And I represented myself through trial. I represented myself throughout the appeals, and ultimately got a police officer to confess on the corruption that resulted in my wrongful conviction. I got out of prison. I was exonerated. I have no criminal record whatsoever. And the next thing that I did was pursue a law degree. I got my law degree. That it's in it of itself was an incredible struggle. I passed the bar 1 year, and they investigated me for 9 more years before giving me a license to practice law. So I had some very, very significant challenges in life that has brought me to this point. During my struggles, during all those times, I've been helping other people that were wrongfully convicted. I got them released from prison. I was even doing that while I was in prison. And so, that prepared me for some of the things that's happening and the challenges that's going on in New York today. I mean, my decision for running for mayor, there was a triggering point when I went up to Times Square several months ago. And when I went up to Times Square, I saw a city that was empty, and that really scared me. I never had seen New York like that before. It was like New York was on its knees. And in the backdrop of all that, there's hundreds of thousands of people that have lost their jobs. You have commercial high rises where entire floors are empty because businesses have moved out. You have small businesses hundreds of them, thousands of them, struggling daily, closing because of this pandemic has also put them on its knees. So the economy is in shambles. And even when you backdrop that to some of New York's most notorious tragedies, we can go to 9/11. So many people lost their lives, but you drove up to Midtown and New York was moving forward. The city was bustling. So this is different. This was very, very, very different. This is a special situation that New York is going through. And not only did it scare me, it made me start thinking about things that I've never thought before. And one was running for office. I knew, based on what I was experiencing in New York, that there had to be a special person this time around for New York to be New York's mayor. They couldn't be the run-of-the-mill career politician. They had to be someone that had a special background and a special understanding of tragedy and struggle.
I want to come back to that in just one sec, but just tell people a little bit more the time between when you were exonerated and released until now, sort of some of the work you've been doing, and just a little bit more about that period before we get to this campaign.
Okay. Yeah. I was exonerated at the end of 1996, right before Christmas. I was released. And when I was released, and this is very, very important, all those things that I did, changing laws and representing myself, I did that with a high school diploma. You know, there's a TV show out now that's inspired by my life, and the character Aaron Wallace got his law degree while he was in jail. But the true story is it was much more difficult than that for me. I did all this with a high school diploma, and so when I was released, I started my life all over again. I'd spent the next 7 years pursuing a law degree. So I did 4 years undergraduate. I did 3 more years law school. And during that time, I was helping people. During the time that I was actually going to school, I was actually doing 2 things. I was helping other people, and I was putting my daughter through college while I was actually going to college. One of the things that I did starting out was I created an organization that helped minorities and people in challenged neighborhoods get jobs under Section 8 within New York City Housing Authority. I promoted that. That turned into an international affair where, you know, I started going around and raising money for project owners across the country, not only across the country, but in different countries like Africa, Spain, Mexico. All these things I was doing to sustain myself and to put my daughter through college and to help other people while I was pursuing a law degree. Even in law school, and anyone that's been a lawyer knows how challenging it is. And this is one of the things that was impressed the Supreme Court of New Jersey. I did 3,000 hours of pro bono work while in law school, getting my law degree, you know, helping other people, reaching out to the community, giving free legal services. And so I passed the bar in 2008. I graduated 2007. I passed the bar in New Jersey in 2008. And the Committee on Character investigated me for another 9 years. You know, and so I don't have a license, so I can't practice. I had to then continue to sustain myself through other means and continue to help people while I moved through that process of getting my license. And ultimately, you know, they saw that there was no way they could keep that from me. And ultimately in 2017, I was granted a license to practice law. Wow. And since then, I've been one of the most sought after lawyers in the country.
And so you have this realization earlier this year about running for office. Say a little bit more about that. I mean, had the thought in the back of your mind ever been there about maybe at some point I'll run for office, or this was more of an epiphany that you had this year amid this great crisis that the city and the country have been facing?
There's been comments here and there that I never took seriously because that just, I'm not a politician, and politics was not something that was ever attracted to me or attractive to me. But you know, through my journey, there have been significant triggers that has caused me to make significant decisions, and intuitively, these things show themselves in different ways. For example, the trigger that caused me to represent myself, the trigger that caused me to take the bar in the very state that sent me to prison for life when I had 49 other states to choose from. You know, there were these triggering mechanisms that caused me to make these decisions. And the trigger for me was seeing New York for the first time on its knees and knowing that New York needed something different, and not knowing where that was going to come from. And I saw myself as that person, that my journey now, these different triggering mechanisms that occurred to me throughout life, I saw that and I felt that other trigger at that moment when I drove into Times Square and saw it empty.
What do you think then that you could do as mayor that, the other more typical politicians couldn't do?
There's two things that I think the next mayor is going to need that I know I have and that I haven't seen in other politicians. One is thinking outside the box, critical thinking and thinking outside the box. And I'll give you an example when I say that. New York is a city that's in a chokehold to a certain extent when it comes down to economics. It is not allowed to borrow its own money. It depends on the state and the federal government for an enormous amount of funds. And the rest of the funds comes from taxation. This is a pandemic. We cannot be strangled with taxes, and we don't even have money to keep our businesses afloat. And so the next New York mayor is going to have to think outside the box as to where they're going to get that money from. And so here's what I have not heard from any of the candidates that I believe is going to be instrumental to New York in getting back on its feet. New York has 113 billionaires as residents. During the pandemic alone, those billionaires accumulated $1 trillion in wealth and extra wealth during the pandemic. It's time to give back. The next mayor is going to have to sit down with these billionaires and ask them to give back, get into a public-private partnership with them, and to funnel money into the economy through two major things that I see: young entrepreneurship and free enterprise programs, where they give grants out to young entrepreneurs trying to create businesses, and they get into partnerships with these other adults and with these other future business owners that have incredible ideas where they want to dump a lot more money into because they want to be partners with these people. If you look at this $1 trillion and you look at the budget deficit of New York has a budget deficit of 9-10 billion. One of those billionaires can take New York out of that deficit by itself. so there's no reason why.
That's asking a lot.
It's asking a whole hell of a lot. But with 113 billionaires, I think together over the course of time, we can trickle into getting New York back to its former glory.
So you think one of the things you could do is better rallying the wealthiest among us in the city to contribute to the city's future?
Absolutely, and I think that would be an answer against raising their taxes. I mean, you ask most of the wealthy, most of the 1%, whether they have a problem with that. Most of them says, no, I don't have a problem with that. But they have incredible tax attorneys. They have incredible shelters. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, if you don't have a problem paying more taxes, keep your money, give it back to the community.
So that's one thing that you think you could do better, do differently than some of the others in the race. What do you foresee, and what do you acknowledge as challenges coming in with a lack of a government background and running for the highest office in the city? Are there ways that you're trying to get up to speed to make sure that the inner workings of city government and of the city budget? Are there things that you're doing to be able to, on this campaign trail, really explain to New Yorkers how prepared you are to be mayor?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been networking since the decision that I made, and I did a lot of research before I actually made the decision, confidently made it. But since that decision, I've been doing a lot of networking. I've been doing a lot of researching. I've been doing my own due diligence on the city of New York, on some of its previous mayors, on some of the challenges that New York has faced, throughout the decades. But one of the things that is very, very important to say as mayor is that a mayor is a leader only of his administration. He is a follower and a server to the people. And in saying that, one of the realities of being a mayor is that you have 300,000 employees. Okay, you have another 200,000 in your inner circle who should be smarter than you are in the jobs that they're entrusted to do. And so leadership does not mean that a mayor is going to jump into the fray and change New York by itself. Leadership means that a mayor has to have the ability to think outside the box, to create these incredible ideas, and to put the proper people in place in order to execute those ideas in order to bring New York back to its former glory. Mm-hmm. And I definitely am able to do that.
So there's a few different pieces there, right? There's sort of vision, there's leadership, there's management, and those are often, confused with each other, but they're different. Say a little bit more though about what the Isaac Wright Jr. vision for New York City is. Do you know at this point some of the key planks to what you want to do for New York City, some of the key pieces to both economic recovery, which is obviously, other than the public health of the virus and making sure that people are healthy, and hopefully the vaccine helps accomplish that. But in terms of economic recovery, in terms of other big issues facing the city, do you know what some of the sort of big pillars of your campaign are, kind of policy wise?
Yeah, absolutely. There's three core issues. One is criminal justice reform. The other is housing. And obviously one of the most important ones is economics. And one of the ideas that I spoke about earlier deals with economics. But one of the things that I'd like to talk about housing first, because housing is extremely important to me in the sense that New York has been going through housing issues ever since I can remember. They're still going through housing issues, and it doesn't look like in the future it's ever going to change without somebody making drastic changes and thinking outside the box. And so, talking about housing, I'm going to give you an example by using the New York City Housing Authority. Right, New York City Housing Authority, they reside over 500,000 people. Okay, and that's extremely important when you look at that. What you're actually looking at when you see NYCHA is you see a city within New York City. And the reason why I'm saying that is very, 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 very key. If you look at Atlanta, if you look at the city of Miami, if you look at the city of Oakland, California, NYCHA is bigger than all of them. So when you look at NYCHA as a city and you compare them to a city like from a population standpoint of Miami, of Atlanta, of Oakland, California, and many, many, many more, you have to say to yourself, wait a minute, I'm walking into a city where nobody owns their own home and ever has. That has to change. And the change in that will not only springboard some of these marginalized people into getting the American dream, but it turns NYCHA into something completely different. Number one, you have billions of dollars that can come in a program like that in NYCHA alone through housing sales. You have another $1 billion a year that you're getting in extra billion that you're getting in property taxes. And so turning NYCHA from a landlord into a partnership with its residents, where they share in that growth, they share in that maintenance, they share in the operation. And these people now, all of a sudden, they have value, they have worth, and they have their own home. That's extremely important for the next mayor. That's something that I know I can do. That's what I'm going to do at day one. And that's one of the most significant policy issues that I'm going to implement.
Before we get to criminal justice and the economy, one more on housing. So that's a big policy proposal for NYCHA, basically allowing residents the opportunity to buy their apartments. What about outside of NYCHA? Do you have a sense of what a sort of the housing lens that you come to? Are you someone, for example, who believes we need to build a lot more private housing in New York City that's a mix of market rate and affordable? Are you someone who believes we don't want to overbuild in New York City and we need to, just sort of leverage what we have already? Do you have a sort of housing philosophy for the private market?
Well, I think the overbuilding can only occur based on the 1%. I think New York has a housing problem. You can't overbuild as long as you have a housing problem. And so I think that the issue with New York when it comes down to providing housing, affordable housing, is zoning issues. New York has a very, very complex zoning diagram, and most mayors have struggled to get rezoning in order to build these types of affordable housing. And so I think the challenge that the next mayor is going to have is not only how to convert some of the housing that they have right now to affordable housing, but to get the zoning laws in place and the rezoning structured properly so that they can continue to build so that New Yorkers can afford their homes. And you got to, it is what it is. New York is a very, very expensive place to live. And without helping, without that push, without those zoning laws and those housing that's designed to deal with people who cannot afford traditional market prices, we're going to continue to have these problems.
What are the focus areas for you on criminal justice reform? Obviously, an area, the larger criminal justice system, where you're quite familiar and have more personal experience than anybody in the race. What do you think needs to happen in criminal justice policy that New York City itself can control?
I think that it starts from the ground in New York City, and that's with the NYPD. And the reason why the NYPD, some reasons are obvious, but the NYPD is the foundation of criminal justice reform in the sense that criminal justice begins in the street with the arrest. You know, it begins with the culture of law enforcement moving out into the environment, moving out into the communities, and effectuating laws in ways where the public can look at them and understand that they're there to protect them, not to hurt them. And there's the first order of business is to deal with that great divide. NYPD right now sees themselves as one thing, and the general public looks at NYPD and they see something else totally different. And so there's a divide there. There's a gap that needs to be closed, and the next mayor is going to have to do that. And to give you an example, you know, there's popular phrase that we hear all the time. There's been a lot of controversy surrounding it, related to defund the police. You know, I hear that all the time, and it's been attacked from all sides. I believe in defunding the police, but I don't believe in defunding the police literally, because we wouldn't have a law enforcement. Defunding the police to me, as the mayor of New York City, means to divert funds to change those things. You know, not to take $100 billion that if it took $100 billion for law enforcement to get militarized, it's going to take at least $100 billion to change that. And so where I see these funds going, I see these funds going into specific types of programs to deal with training, to attack the culture of silence that perpetuates these problems, to have a private and citizen review boards, to mingle and interact and have dialogue, constant dialogue with law enforcement, and to bring the community and law enforcement together. These things are going to take dollars, and it's going to take police dollars to do.
Do you subscribe to the broken windows theory of policing, that that uniformed police officers should be paying special attention to lower level crime, disorder, to prevent more serious crime, to prevent violent crime, and that, you know, a police force, which is right now in the 35 to 36,000 head count range for just uniformed officers, and then another 10, 15,000 of civilian, but that a very large uniform department is needed to execute that type of strategy, a combination of broken windows and community policing. Is that the type of framework that you have?
It depends on what community policing means. You know, one of the things about the microscope on law enforcement and the way they police is directly related to what the people in the community see when they see law enforcement. We have an incredible issue with diversity in law enforcement, with a Black and brown community seeing Black and brown law enforcement officers to the same extent that represents the community itself. And so a lot of times you have people criticizing issues that really shouldn't be criticized because they're upset about other things that's happening in their communities with law enforcement. If there's a crime committed, I think that there should be law enforcement there to deal with those crimes. The only way that law enforcement should step back is if it's medical issues, if it's mental health issues. Then I think at that point, law enforcement should step back, and there should be specific outreach to those neighborhoods and to those individuals, with law enforcement always there when needed. But I think if we remove law enforcement from that, you know, all the other issues regarding law enforcement and you know, issues regarding diversity, we fix those. I don't see any issues at all.
We're quickly coming to the last 4 or 5 minutes we have together, so I just want to make sure to get to a few other things with you. Is there anything you wanted to name in brief, unfortunately, because we're running low on time, about an economic platform and ways that you would spur jobs?
The thing that's not what I'd like to talk about very briefly is the thing that no one else has talked about, that no other candidate is talking about, and that is what happens with these guys, with these business owners who's actually lost their business. We have economic stimuluses for people who've lost their jobs. We have them for businesses who's lost revenue. But there's nobody talking about the guys who are already down and out. And so one of the things that I'm going to do as mayor is I'm going to solicit the federal government for funds specifically for New York City, designed to provide for those business owners who have lost their businesses to start new businesses. And I think from an economic standpoint, providing funds, providing stimulus for individuals who have lost their jobs, or not their jobs, lost their businesses, and to then go and create new businesses is one of the starting points for getting the economy back together.
Interesting. Tell us a little bit about your thoughts about Mayor Bill de Blasio. Obviously, the field of candidates is running to replace him. His record, his approach to things is a key piece of this race, just like any outgoing mayor would be. What's your evaluation of him?
Well, I would have a lot to say about de Blasio if he was running. But nothing that I would say about de Blasio now is going to change anything that he's done. It's not like he was a mayor that's done nothing. I don't see that I'm in a position right now with all these other candidates that I have to face to say some of the things that I'm disappointed with de Blasio about. I would say about him that there's some things that he's done, pretty good. I know that there's some things that he's done that I've disagreed with, and there's a lot of people in the population who disagree with some of his policies also.
Give us one quick example of both. One thing you think he's done well, and one thing you think he's been very poor about.
Well, the two things that I was disappointed about is schools, the way he handled, the economic and desegregation issues related to New York City schools, and the MTA. I mean, the MTA was taken from us and now is being controlled by Albany. But we're New Yorkers. We deal with the MTA. We ride those buses and those trains every day. And so I thought he should have done more to get more control back over to the MTA for the people of New York. Those are the things that I'm disappointed about.
And when you say desegregate, you think he should have been bolder about desegregating the city schools? Is that what?
Yes, and I think that's more of an economic issue first when you come to desegregation than a color issue, because one of the things about desegregation is directly related to the attractiveness of the schools, both financially and educational wise. And so I think if he had made schools attractive across all communities, he could better tackle the issues of desegregation.
And if you had to give him a letter grade for his tenure, what would it
be? Well, he's going out, so I don't think I'm qualified to give him a grade because he's leaving.
Last question. Do you have any political role models? If people you're new to politics, new to running for office, if you had to say there was one or a couple of role models in politics, people you look up to, people you try to emulate, people who maybe your politics are similar, not the same, but close to. Do you have folks past or present that you would name?
There's two modern politicians that I would view as role models. One is our present Governor Cuomo, and the other is our past President Barack Obama. Those are the two.
Okay. We're going to leave it there, but appreciate the time. Isaac Wright Jr., thanks for the conversation and good luck on the campaign trail.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And thank you for watching Decision NYC with Ben Max. I hope this conversation has been helpful to you, and stay tuned for others here in this series. There's a lot on the line for all of us in this election season, and we hope these conversations are helpful to you as you make your choices. Until next time, goodbye.